Welcome, everyone. We have about 2 minutes till we begin the webinar, so go ahead and get yourselves nice and comfortable. We'll get started here in about 2 minutes. We're going to go ahead and get started in about 30 seconds. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Sustainability and Innovation. I am Amy Spowert, President and CEO of the National Aviation Hall of Fame. I'm really excited to share that we have our largest audience yet. This is our 4th webinar, and we have a truly international audience for this talk today with a really impressive panel. People from Canada, Japan, New Zealand, Switzerland are joining us as well as from across the country. So this is coming to you from a collaboration between the National Aviation Hall of Fame and the National Aeronautic Association. Our missions combined by recognizing the most legendary people and the most remarkable achievements in aviation and aerospace. To learn more about our organizations, please visit our websites. Members of the Hall of Fame and the NAA received advance notice of today's webinar and were able to sign up for this limited opportunity. This will be the same for our future events, so please consider becoming a member today. As we go through this webinar, please feel free to send your questions and we'll do our best to incorporate them into the conversation. Now, let's get this party started. The aviation industry has grown and thrived through the years because of the innovative spirit and efforts of those who came before us. It has sustained its success through good times and bad, but rarely have we seen a confluence of events as we have today. Still, it always seems certain that aviation's best days are ahead. To help us think about how innovation and commitment to sustainability will guide aviation through these days into a brighter future, let me introduce our amazing panel. Ed Boland is the President and CEO of the National Aviation Association, a position he has held since 2004. Before taking over NBAA, Ed was President and CEO of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association. In his earlier career, he was Legislative Director for Senator Nancy Kassenbaum and General Counsel to what is now the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. He has been appointed to numerous federal commissions by presidents of both parties. Welcome, Ed.
Thanks, Amy.
George Bai is the founder and CEO of Bai Aerospace. He has a long career as an aerospace entrepreneur, engineer, and executive focused on the research and development of advanced concepts. He is the driving force behind the concept and development of the all-electric E-Flyer family of aircraft, which Bai Aerospace launched in 2013 and is the FAA Part 23 certification process. He was a United States Air Force instructor pilot on the supersonic T-38 and is a Desert Storm veteran. Welcome, George, and thank you for your service.
Thank you so much.
Roy Garzanski is the CEO of Magni-X, which has developed a family of electric propulsion systems for commercial aviation. Before joining Magni-X, Roy was the CEO of Bold IQ, a global provider of dynamic scheduling optimization software. Earlier, Roy was the Chief Customer Officer for Boeing's Flight Services Division, leading all worldwide customer and market-facing organizations. Roy has also worked in the investment banking, finance, and advertising industry and served in the Israeli military. I can't talk today. Welcome, Roy. Nancy Young is the Vice President, Environmental Affairs for Airlines for America. Nancy directs A4A's environmental sustainability programs. She represents airlines in international negotiations on noise and emission standards. She is on the steering group of the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative and participates in working groups under the International Civil Aviation Organizations Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection. Whew. Her previous experience includes stints on Capitol Hill and as a partner in a major law firm. Welcome, Nancy.
Oh, thank you. Delighted to be here.
Joining me today, as always, is co-moderator Greg Principato, President and CEO of the National Aeronautic Association. Hi, Greg.
Hello.
Let's start with our first poll question. Fingers at the ready. Can a widely accepted case be made for the environmental sustainability of aviation? We'll go ahead and give you all a couple seconds to look that over. All right, and while we're looking at the answers from our poll questions, I'm going to go ahead and get started with Nancy. Nancy, can you tell us what is meant by sustainability in aviation, and can the case be made?
Well, thanks so much, Amy, and thanks to you and Greg and your organizations for this important panel. Sustainability, I think you posed the question in terms of environment, but it's really a balancing and advancing of economic, social, and environmental good. And the US Airlines, who I represent, have really been focusing on that entire package, since the beginning of commercial aviation, really. And it means really delivering goods and services and air transport to people who need it, just-in-time goods and humanitarian relief and all of the things that you can do socially that benefit humanity, connecting it, but also doing what you can for the planet. And we have a really strong record on the things we're going to talk about today: climate change, aircraft noise, recycling, a number of things like innovations that we're going to get into about driving sustainable aviation fuels and new technology. So I'm very, very much looking forward to walking through some of those real world examples of what we're doing to ensure that we're contributing and will continue to pre-COVID, during COVID, and after COVID.
Nice. So Ed, just to give us a little bit of background, can you tell us generally what the world would look like now, considering pre-COVID traffic levels, if we had, say, the noise and emission of 20 years ago?
I've been part of the aviation community since 1995. So when I just look at my career, where we were and where we are today, it's really pretty stunning. In the late 90s, we really were not sure that the government, the military would not jam GPS. So navigation was not where it is today, particularly since we just moved to ADS-B. So GPS navigation is now part of the business aviation community and all of aviation. We've seen advances in everything from winglets, composite technologies, which were in the very early stages, are now really kind of everywhere. We've moved from engine technology, we've moved from stage 2 to stage 3, we're moving forward on stage 4. And really, as you look at it, we have seen consistent improvement in efficiencies each and every year as we've moved forward. So that has been key. The aircraft technology, both engine, materials, noise reductions, and the advancements in the system really provide an opportunity for us to grow while reducing our environmental footprint. And I think some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, including advancements in propulsion and in fuel itself, really lead to a pretty bright future for business aviation when we look at it from a sustainability standpoint.
If I could give a couple statistics just to augment what Ed just said. Since the mid-70s, the U.S. airlines and business aviation sector have reduced the number of people exposed to significant aircraft noise by 94%, while more than quadrupling enplanements. And I think that, Amy, gets to your point. If we hadn't done those things, what would have the noise been pre-COVID? And also in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the US aviation industry writ large, including military, is about 2.9% of the greenhouse gas emissions, while we drive more than 5% of the GDP, and US airlines themselves are 2% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So if it's really because of constant improvements that Ed mentioned, like improving our fuel efficiency over 135% since 1978, that we're able to have that kind of fuel efficiency and hence emissions efficiency.
So in light of that, George, why to so many people right now is sustainable aviation an oxymoron, and how do we change it? Looking forward, how are we going to deal with this?
Well, I think I would start with commenting along with Ed and Nancy that the efficiencies, and we'll focus on electric, of course, more as we progress through the time today. But it is interesting to see that with composite structural materials, advances in aerodynamics, our aircraft, for example, have twice the aero efficiency of the legacy aircraft of a few decades ago, literally twice the aero efficiency, as measured by L/D or some other engineering, if you wish. But I think we see the collection of technologies, the efficiency of getting through the air advancing incredibly, not just propulsion itself, which is so important, but the other aspects, the aerodynamics, the structures, the technical systems, all working together, combining to a more efficient and sustainable future. And I think to your point, some are skeptical, and rightly so. We've seen some technologies kind of come and go, and some forecasters make very grand gestures of, the future is here and it's upon us today. And sure enough, setbacks occur, challenges occur, and yet at the same time, the incremental evolutionary benefits are coming every single day with new business aircraft, commercial aircraft, and we hope soon we'll see much of that benefit general aviation as well.
Roy, anything to add to this?
Someone once said that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. I think we're insane. We're at a point now, we used to think that smoking was okay. We used to think that driving in a car without a seatbelt was okay. In fact, cars didn't have seatbelts. And it took a change in mindset and a change in the way we think about things to really understand that cigarettes are bad and thus we have to do something about it. And it was the ecosystem. It wasn't just tax cigarettes. It was educational aspects. It was taking it out of movies in Hollywood. It was really going after the cigarette companies. It was the cigarette companies themselves figuring out that maybe what they've been doing was wrong. Same thing with seatbelts. Incremental changes are really good. They're fantastic. But they won't change what we're trying to change. And if the environment is important, and if reducing the cost of aviation is important, and going to a more on-demand economy in the aviation industry, just like it is in every other industry, we need to make step changes, not incremental changes. We cannot add 1% a year, 5% a year. Oh, here's a project with 7% a year. We have to go all in and change things. That's why I'm excited about what Bai Aerospace are doing with their aircraft, what Pipistrel were recently doing, what Aviation are doing. We're today living in the jet age of aviation, not because of jet aircraft, but because of jet propulsion. We had to, in 1939, have a step change in propulsion in order to enable new aircraft, as George very clearly said, new designs that allowed more efficiency. If we want to change in the way we fly today, we have to change propulsion. Go to electric propulsion, or whatever the new propulsion is going to be. It just happens to be electric that we're doing now as an industry. But that electric propulsion will enable companies like Bai Aerospace to design really awesome aircraft that are significantly better than anything else out there. And they will go from not 5% reduction in emissions or 30% reduction in emissions, but zero emissions. And if we want to change, that's what we need to do, is change the way we think about the industry.
So that's a perfect, oh, sorry, go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's both evolution and revolution, and that the aviation industry has always been about both of those things. And you have to continue to evolve to work the longer term revolutionary things. So we'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit more about sustainable aviation fuels that are liquid fuels. And then how do we transition over time to the types of electric aircraft that Roy and George are working on to work beyond just a general aviation application. And that, you know, we're looking 30 years out. We're working with NASA and research and development on that. But there's not a one size fits all here. You gotta take, no silver bullet, it's silver buckshot. You gotta take it all.
And that's a perfect segue into our second poll question. The electric propulsion system will be widely available in general and commercial aviation by, and go ahead and vote. And I'm going to turn it over to Greg now.
Thanks very much, Amy. By the way, as we continue, I want to suggest to Ed Boland that maybe you move a little closer to the microphone. You know, when you answer a bit later, a couple of comments that it was hard to hear. We just put up a question about electric propulsion, and we're going to have another question in a few minutes that also gets to new technologies. And so I want to really delve into that in a few minutes. I want to stick with a couple of bigger picture issues first, to start bigger picture and then really bore down into the new technologies. You know, it seems over the years, you know, we have people from different sectors of aviation on with us now. A lot of us have been involved in these fights and discussions over the years, looking for sustainable business models for airports, airlines, aircraft manufacturers, and everybody else. And there's always a lot of conflicting stakeholder views on things. We've all been in some colorful conversations about those over the years. It seems to me, I'm going to just pose a hypothesis or an observation. It seems to me there are fewer conflicts now. Maybe it's because people are coming together over the broader definition of sustainability that Nancy talked about. But it seems like there are fewer conflicts now among the different stakeholders over these issues, which gives me hope about moving forward. So I'm going to just sort of throw this out. Nancy, since I called you out, I'll let you go first, and then and then maybe you to Roy, and then George and Ed can jump in. By the way, for those of you who can't see it, 58% say that we'll have widely available electric propulsion by 2030, not too distant future, and 5% say by 2025. So more than 60% say in the next 10 years. But Nancy, if you could talk about my observation, just see if it squares with yours. I'd like to hear from the rest of the panel too.
Well, one of the best things about heading up environment and sustainability for the major trade association for the U.S. Airlines is we work very closely with the other entities that sometimes may compete with us on certain types of questions about access to airspace or other things like that. And Greg, I think you're absolutely right. We view working together to do the things that we need to do to make air traffic management system efficient, you know, and more efficient, which, you know, environmental groups themselves have said is one of the best things you can do in bringing back our economy. Frankly, at the same time doing green things. We work very closely and really hand in hand with the business aviation community in divining how to make sustainable aviation fuel a reality and make it work in small aircraft and large aircraft and ensure safety. We are really working in a number of public-private programs to advance research and development on technology and deployment for noise reduction and those things. So I think, Greg, you're right. I mean, we may have our differences from time to time, but we all have the same aim, which is to make sure that environment isn't something on which we're really competing. We want it to be a lead part of all of the industry.
Ed, since you mentioned business aviation, why don't you comment? And then I'd like to hear Roy and George's comments too.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Nancy said. I don't know how many times through the years NBAA and A4A and others have been working at the same table environmentally, both in the United States and in Montreal at ICAO. I like what Nancy said earlier about it's not a rifle shot or a silver bullet, it's buckshot, it spreads. And just going back to focus on the fact that it is air traffic control, it is aerostructures, it is propulsion systems, it is fuel. There's just a host of things, and we have consistently worked together as a group because we recognize while we are in the mobility industry, finding ways to move people ever more efficiently and sustainably has been a long-term commitment from the aviation industry. And that's why you see so many commitments that are made from our industry about constantly improving where we are out through 2050.
And
I don't know if Roy or George have any comments.
Yeah, one of our commenters reminded us of avionics, and of course, it's what is, you know, that's a big part of the technology drive to then make our operations as efficient as possible.
Roy or George have any comments on that before? I have a question specific. I want you guys to specifically start on, but if you have any comments on what we just talked about. I know, Roy, you're a little less patient than some of the rest. Patient's not the right word, but you're ready to go, right?
Well, so I mean, there's a few things here. One, first of all, I agree completely with Nancy and Ed in that there is both a revolution and an evolution needed. As much as I want to do electric propulsion for a 777 size aircraft today, it's not going to happen, right? Whether it be hydrogen batteries, it doesn't matter. It's not going to happen in the next 30 years. And so, yes, the more we can do with sustainable fuels, et cetera, every percentage point counts when you can't do a revolution. But we also don't want to stifle the revolution because the evolution wants to continue forward. I think the biggest thing isn't so much that there aren't as many conflicts. I think the biggest change is they're now transparent. Whereas 15, 20, 30 years ago, industry, all of us, could have shown a few PowerPoint slides or whatever medium we were using back then and said, here's the data population, believe us when we tell you that, like cigarettes are fine and no need for seatbelts because we don't want to invest in seatbelts. We can no longer do that. We can now have a 16-year-old Greta Thunberg in Sweden start a movement worldwide to stop selling tickets on airlines. And she's successful. Scandinavia has seen a drop in airline sales, in airline ticket sales, because of flight chain. And so we're now in a world that's much more transparent, where consumers can see real time when someone is being pulled off an airline or when emissions are being created, and data is free for all to have. The interpretation of the data is a different story, but the data is out there. And so I think right now, we can no longer hide behind our own data that we want to share. We need to live within the data and the demands of our customers, of the flying public. And when the flying public says, I want less emissions, we can't anymore explain to them how over the past 100 years we've reduced emissions. They don't care. They want to know that on the next flight they're going on, there will be less emissions or they won't fly. And so again, as an industry, I think we need to really listen to what's going on out there from the flying public and address those with immediate action, while at the same time also addressing the need for evolutionary change, sustainable fuels, et cetera. So that's kind of on one aspect. The second is, I think that it's important that everyone listening understand this is not about the environment only. None of us are members of Greenpeace, not that I know of at least. We're not doing this to save the planet. If we only focused on what do we have to do to save the planet, we will fail, because there are plenty of solutions out there that can help reduce emissions. They're just really, really expensive. And so they're not being taken aboard because we also don't think, and we hear from the consumer and the flying public, they won't pay 10 times the ticket price to fly on something that's environmentally friendly. And so the whole prospect has to be, to Nancy's point of what true sustainability is, how do you do environmentally friendly solutions that are also business friendly and socially friendly and politically friendly, so that it's everyone winning and everyone benefiting? Because if it's only one over the other, it won't happen.
Roy, before I get to the next question, which I want George to start off on, you mentioned the flight shaming issue, and I know Nancy has a comment on that. And then George, I want to tee you up with to build on this with another question.
Just quickly on the flight shaming issue, it's, you know, we certainly respect exactly what Roy said. If, you know, people want to make sure that there is environmental improvement, it's sustainable. But really important job that we have to continue to do is educate people about our real record, like you said, the data. And if we had put up the poll question, this is an educated audience, but a lot of not so educated audiences, you ask them how much greenhouse gas emissions or what percentage are US airlines accountable for? And a lot of fun at a dinner party, really. And they'll say 20%, 25%, 30%, we're 2%. And so, and we have, you know, a multi-year plan that we've been executing to minimize even that amount. So it's important that that discussion about flight shaming be done in a factual context.
So I have to disagree, Nancy, because the data also shows that if we continue down the track we are with the amount of commercial flights happening, that number will double. And while 2%
I'm going to disagree.
While 2% is a small amount, it's still a lot of emissions.
I totally hear you. And if our industry had not committed, and if there were not plans in place to have a carbon neutral growth starting in 2020 and a 50% net reduction in CO2 emissions in 2050, that might be the case. So many of those predictions are based on as if we were doing nothing. And that has never been the way that this industry treats environmental progress.
You know, regardless of the outcome of that debate, you know, if we're going to have change and get some of these things in, airlines and aircraft operators are going to obviously have to replace aircraft they're already using, right, with something new, with more modern, environmentally friendly aircraft, sustainable and economically sustainable too. You know, aircraft that are cheaper to operate, and that they can operate for 20 or 30 years. It's not a small, whether it's a business aircraft, whether it's a commercial airline, or whether it's a personal general aviation aircraft, it's not a small investment. So George, can you talk a little bit about your thoughts about airlines and aircraft operators and replacing older aircraft with newer ones? You've obviously got something, you know, that you're looking to get certified. And also, whether you think there's a COVID effect to this, where are people going to hold on to their money because, you know, we're in a tough economic situation, or are people going to take, you know, somebody once said, let no good crisis go to waste. Are people going to, you know, decide this is the time to invest in something new? What do you think?
So I'll try to tie together the earlier comments just here briefly, and then kind of move through the question that you presented. One of our largest customers is OSM Academy in Norway. Great people, a tremendous professional flight training program. They have 60 E-Flyer 2s on order with Bai Aerospace, the flight trainer version of the family of aircraft that we're developing. They are very proud to be directionally going to all electric. They're very proud. There's greater sensitivity perhaps in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, as we just talked about, to all things electric. And there's some cultural and technology background to perhaps to part of that story. But generally, I think we all agree, worldwide, there's a trend towards sustainability, that the momentum is, call it even a tidal wave, if you wish. It's moving through the markets, it's moving through all things EV and the banking industry, et cetera. But as we look through practical initial applications, the evolutionary benefits of, as I spoke about, aerodynamic structure, the advanced avionics, as Ed was talking about, GPS, the ability to be more precise in navigation, et cetera, all contribute underneath and support the, I would call even disruptive benefits of electric propulsion. And I point that out because OSM Flight Academy is, I mean, they embrace the environmental benefits for sure. They embrace the sustainability and the commentary going on with the politics, if you will, and the rest of it. But the bottom line is the economics, as Roy was saying, the business case for electric propulsion is profoundly important. It's not par. It's not a one-for-one exchange. It is literally 1/5 the operating cost. You compare a legacy flight trainer with an electric flight trainer, it is literally 1/5 the operating cost. And OSM, of course, very excited about all of the environmental benefits and being able to talk about new technology and all of the things that that training tool provides. But the bottom line for the business of aviation, mobility of aviation, training, and the other functions that come with all the things that aviation brings, when you can reduce the operating cost by such a dramatic proportion, many, many new things become opportunities. New business cases arise. The ability to bring in a broader opportunity for flight training to with reduced economic impact. The mobility benefits that go from training into air taxi, into regional, and eventually to commercial applications, all are enabled by economic motivation along with the incredible benefits to the environment.
Other comments on that, especially if anybody thinks there'd be a COVID effect to this, or people deciding to either hold off on investing in new aircraft or speed it up, either whether from the commercial side, the business side, GA, any of it. Any of it?
COVID is interesting in that a few things are happening. We already talked about the fact that there's these two trends that have been happening worldwide. One is the move to an on-demand economy. The other is environmental awareness, we can call it. But COVID now is doing some interesting things. And we see it in travel. Airlines, unfortunately, were the first to be hit by COVID, right? The first thing people don't want to do is crowd in an airport or get on a plane, and you start restricting, even the states start restricting traveling, countries restrict traveling, et cetera. So unfortunately, the aerospace industry was the first to be hit and the hardest to be hit, most likely. But what we're seeing now is people don't want to stop traveling, right? We are, as humans, we're a social being, be it for personal reasons, for business reasons. These video conferences are great, but how much better would it be if we all sat around a table and actually talked and could have a drink later and discuss things and continue? And so people want to be social. But the average flight, if you look at 2018, 2019 airline data, 45% of all airline flights scheduled were less than 500 miles in range. 45%. 70% were actually less than 1,000 miles in range. But if you just take that 45% to 500 miles in range, that tells you most people fly very short distances. And I think COVID-19 will start to create, and we're seeing this now from customers and consumers, they're going to think twice about, if I'm going to fly for an hour, do I really want to drive 45 minutes to one of the main airport hubs, be in the airport with hundreds and thousands of other people standing in line through security, be there an hour ahead of time, only to get on a 1-hour flight to get to another hub airport that's 45 minutes away from my destination anyway? Maybe I should just drive. And that's what people are doing now. But what if you, to George's point, could have an airplane that is 20% cost, so the ticket will be less, I won't say the full 20% cost, but let's say it's 50% of what it is now. And instead of going from a hub airport, you're getting on a 9, 19, 30 passenger aircraft from a smaller airport that's 15 minutes away from you, because at least the United States is covered with over 10,000 airports that could do that. Europe also has its fair share of airports since World War II. And you could fly that same hour, but arrive to the airport 15 minutes ahead of time with only 20 other people. So I think the consumers, again, will start to push for, if I'm only traveling a short distance, I want my door-to-door experience to be better, not just the flight portion, but the entire door-to-door. So I think we're going to see a trend towards moving towards that.
So what I want to do here, I'd like to have Nancy and Ed talk real briefly about what they see as the COVID effect in terms of, moving to new aircraft innovation and sustainability. I want to put up a third poll question after that. I also want to remind people in the audience, if you have questions, please submit them on the Q&A. We've been able to work a couple of them in already to the discussion, and we'll do our best to work all of them in. But Nancy and Ed, you have Nancy first, and then Ed, if you have any comments on the COVID effect on moving toward more innovative and sustainable aircraft types and so forth. And they'll put up the third poll question to get more into the technology issues.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's having obviously a huge economic and people effect on our industry. Right now, we have about 29% of the fleet is idled. That is actually a significant improvement from the months of April and May when we had 50% of the aircraft fleet idled. And so this is a real concern because US airlines are going through it, and airlines around the world going through a tremendous financial crisis, and people do want to fly, but we're not able to do that to the degree we want to yet. So that does have an effect on people's lives, on the great jobs that we provide, et cetera. But the US airlines have recommitted to their sustainability commitments during this time. And I think that's a really critical thing. That is not an area where cuts are being made. And to the extent that, sadly, part of the fleet is not going to come back. They're going to be the older aircraft. You're going to get noise benefits from that. You're going to get fuel and efficiency benefits from that. So when we can start to invest again, we'll be investing from an already much more, the newer version of the fleet, and we're not going to stop meeting our sustainability goals.
Do you have any comments before we put the next poll question out?
Yeah, and I'll just follow a little bit on what some of the previous commentators have said. So I think I just heard Nancy say, but I think it's worth underscoring that a lot of the commercial airlines have begun retiring some of their older aircraft, which of course means the more efficient, the quieter airplanes really are making up a much larger part of the fleet. I would also say, to Roy's point, we are social in nature, but one of the things that we are seeing as a result of COVID is that there's a movement from the dense urban areas to some of the, what we would think of as secondary or even tertiary communities. And as Roy pointed out, there is a strong airport infrastructure in the United States that may be able to handle that, assuming we have the right aircraft. I do want to touch on, because you asked, what is the impact? Is it going to spur technology? I would have to say, Greg, if you rewind the clock back to January and February, you would shine a spotlight on one of the most exciting periods in aerospace history. All of the propulsion, all of the eVTOL aircraft, the advanced air mobility, is clearly very exciting. We've seen remarkable advances in drone technology, supersonic flight, commercial space launch. So technology was not kind of the issue. There was a lot being focused on aerospace. I think that will continue. I do think it's worth watching some of the social changes that may take place as we perhaps are a little less focused on the mega cities and look more at small and mid-sized communities as fundamental to the economy moving forward.
That's a great point, I think. And why don't we go ahead and put the third poll question up? And while that's being done, and as you see, we want to really spend the last third or so of this on some of the technology issues. We had a really interesting question from Scott Newman from our audience. And I'm going to have to read it because I probably don't understand it well enough. And this will be for George and Roy first, and then obviously all four of you. But Scott says propulsion always leads new aircraft innovations. With the new propulsion type, there's a period of experimentation. before designs coalesce around the best design. What kind of experimentation do you see in the electric aircraft field, since it may actually be several propulsion types, battery, hybrid, hydrogen, etc.? Maybe George and Roy can start with that, and then whichever of you speak first, and then the other, and then all four can comment.
I'll go ahead. Yeah, I think that is fascinating. Bai Aerospace has been working on electric and solar electric aircraft for over 10 years, and been in flight tests, to your point, for many various configurations along the way. It is indeed a combination of energy storage and the propulsion system. I don't believe anybody would argue that electric motors aren't inefficient. I think everybody is aware the electrons to torque to thrust equation is profoundly beneficial with electric. Now, what Roy is doing, of course, is taking the physics of that and putting it in an aviation package. Industry and industrial applications for electric motors and generators have been around for 100 years. But to put them in a light and efficient package on an airplane is an entirely different subject. So I'm grateful to Roy and others like Roy that are making electric motors in a configuration where we can fly them. But we go back a number of years with Bai Aerospace, and people used to ask us how long was our extension cord, and the audience would typically laugh, and we were flying around a little circle with an extension cord, because the second part of the equation, the batteries, had not yet evolved and moved in their revolution to where they are today. The energy density of batteries, a term hopefully some of us in the audience today understand, at least in part. The amount of energy stored per unit weight is so critical to electric aviation. It's not just the motor, profoundly beneficial for sure, but it's the amount of energy stored per unit weight in the batteries. And in the last 5 years, we've gone from a figure of about 100 watt hours per kilogram to about 270 watt hours per kilogram. And when I talk to the audience about that today, they're not laughing anymore. They're not asking how long my extension cord is, because we have now crossed the threshold of practical electric certified aircraft. There is no technology, enabling technology remaining for us to certify under the FAR Part 23, the first fixed wing electric aircraft. E-Flyer 2, E-Flyer 4 will immediately follow. So Greg, to your point, what Roy is doing is profoundly important, together with the technology around battery energy density, battery safety, how we organize the batteries, the cells, the modules, and so forth for safety in mind, absolutely paramount. But to actually create a practical working solution, certifiable with a problem to solve, whether it's training or what we were just talking about, air taxi, regional air taxi, and we go from an E-Flyer 2 to a 4 to a 6-seater, and then on to a 9-seat twin. That progression is enabled by the combination of the entire propulsion system, motor and battery packs.
So, just real quick, 2/3 of our audience thinks electric propulsion is the next big thing, by the way, for those who didn't see the result.
We have a very
Roy, can you also comment a little bit too on the the battery storage, and is there something like what happened with computing power in the future for batteries, where the capability can double every 18 months?
So first of all, I'll say you have a very wise audience in that the majority think electric is the next big thing. So I'll just throw that out there. A few points to make. One, when it comes to propulsion, Scott, I think, is the one who asked the question. Absolutely right. That's the reason we're now, as magniX at least, on our 3rd iteration of our propulsion system. We've been flying since last December the e-Beaver with hardware up in Canada. Since May, the e-Caravan, the Cessna Grand Caravan that's been converted to all electric. And the idea is exactly that. We don't claim that a month from now you'll be able to buy a ticket and get on a Cessna Grand Caravan that's all electric and start flying. This is a multi-year process of proving out the technology, then certifying the technology, and then starting to deploy it. And so we've been doing that. Magnex has been around since 2009. Similar to George's story, we've been doing this for quite some time. So this isn't the first iteration. This is just what's been publicly started to be shared. So that's kind of on the one side. In terms of batteries, I agree with George as well. I will say, though, this is very much a chicken and egg situation, to use the old analogy. And in this case, it truly is so. If 2 years ago, either George or myself would go to a battery company and say, hey, why aren't you building kind of these high energy dense batteries for an electric airplane? The answer would be, and it was, what electric airplane? Show me an airplane, I'll build a battery for it. Then you'd go to the airplane company and say, hey, why aren't you designing an airplane that's electric? And the answer would be, and it was, with what propulsion system? And so we had to start with propulsion to really enable then the companies to build and design phenomenal aircraft like the E-Flyer. Now that these have been flying, not even commercially, but even test flying, suddenly battery companies, and batteries, by the way, is not just the form of battery you can think of. Hydrogen is a battery. It's a form of energy storage. It's a hydrogen fuel cell. It also creates electricity. And so whether it's a hydrogen or battery, lithium ion, lithium sulfur, solid state, to the propulsion and to the aircraft, it doesn't really matter. The more energy, the better. But you had to bring that to bear in order to do that. The same you could look at vehicles 10 years ago. When Tesla started, the only car battery you could buy was a 12-volt battery at Costco that went in the front of your car. And everyone said the exact same thing to Tesla that they're saying to Bai and to us now, which is, you won't have enough battery, you won't have enough range. What about range anxiety? And here we are 8 years later. I have an electric car as my family car. We love it. And there's no range anxiety. Can I do Seattle to LA nonstop in my electric car? No. How many times do I do that? So it's really about fitting the mission and the technology. And from going back to my initial point, we have to start to change the way we think about aviation. It's no longer a hub and spoke main airport to smaller airports. To Ed's point, which is I think very good, COVID has also taught us that working from home actually works. There are software companies out there that have said, this will continue even after COVID, just work from home. And so now people can say, I don't want to live in the big city anymore where it's expensive, it's crowded. I want to go out to a suburban life. And we can now, with electric aviation, redefine a suburb. If you're willing to drive an hour to the office, why not fly 15 minutes? And so you can really redefine that aspect. And then just to quickly touch on a point that was raised here by Carl Kettler, I see, flying the airplane is no different. When I get into a Tesla and drive it, it's the same driving license as I do my Ford F-150, right? It's exactly the same thing. The same thing will happen to airplanes. If you're designing a new type of airplane, you'll need to get trained on that type of airplane. But the fact that it's electric just means that it's lower cost to operate, more reliable, longer lead time, longer life, and no emissions. But it doesn't mean you fly it any differently.
I feel like a little bit about
a comment.
Yeah, I feel like this is a little bit like that one of these things is not like the other, right? Because I represent commercial aviation, and we are excited about moving part of what can happen to electric aircraft. But that is not going to happen anytime in the near future. 52% of the world's fleet is twin-aisle aircraft at 6,500 kilometers average flight stage. So we're excited and delighted about what is being done in the smaller aircraft space. And it's really going to help bring proof of concept. But a lot more work will have to be done before you have electric aircraft on commercial jet. And I earlier said, we don't really compete, GA and business aviation, along with commercial aviation in environment. And we don't have to. Posing it as you have a business model along the lines that Roy is saying can be very compatible with commercial aviation and all that we're doing in sustainable aviation fuel, which we created, in the US industry. So I really appreciate what they're doing, but for the audience's purposes, I think we do need to distinguish the near term and general aviation and smaller aircraft and what we're trying to do in the longer term, you know, in the near term, we have sustainable aviation fuel, which we created. And in the longer term, we will have hybrid and hybrid electric aircraft, but the thrust and the weight and the battery issues are going to be significant.
So we're coming toward the end of the program, only about 12 more minutes to go, and we could probably do this for a couple of hours or so. Amy, I think of all the webinars we've done, this is the one I never had to worry about whether we were going to have enough questions and discussion to keep things going. Let's put up our final poll question and then get into a couple of other questions before we wrap up. The pathway to a more sustainable future in aviation is through technology and innovation, policy and regulation, or both. I know in some parts of the world, they really focus on the policy and regulation approach, some on technology and innovation. I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Yeah, you know, I was gonna lead off with Nancy here, but I'm really dying to ask Ed the question that Shelley Simi said in. I really want to know, you know, in talking about, you know, electric motor and in this, can we get general aviation and business aviation to stand behind this? I mean, where are they? We can see that, you know, Nancy representing commercial aviation is, you know, very proud about biofuels, and we can see that George and Roy are very excited about where are we with general aviation and business aviation in this discussion?
Well, we think both are right, and we are enthusiastically supportive of all these efforts. You know, general aviation, you will go back to the Wright brothers. It started with a small Wright flyer, and before long we had intercontinental aircraft. And so I think what we see is technology can start small and grow pretty quickly. But I really appreciate what Nancy is saying, because the distances that we are connecting in aviation, you know, aircraft are flying halfway around the world. And so we are connecting different continents, different cultures, and generating commerce. And that's really always been at the foundation of successful economies and countries, the ability to do commerce, to do trade. You know, you look at the great port cities, the great rail cities, and aviation clearly is important for the economy and for commerce. And I think that whether it's small, short haul, or big, long haul, certainly all of that is exciting about the future. And I do want to go back. I think Roy made a really important point when he said it's got to be environmentally friendly, business friendly, and socially friendly. And I think the answer is no silver bullets, but lots of exciting stuff happening, whether it's through the fuels, through the propulsion systems, the supersonic. There's a lot going on. And from our perspective, it is all good.
Well, I think just touching on that, going back to the poll question where hardly anybody chose supersonic flight, they clearly haven't heard about Boom Aerospace and the amazing things Blake is doing out there in Denver. So, I mean, there's a lot of exciting things, like you said, happening in aviation. But Nancy, I gotta say, nobody voted for policy and regulation in that last poll question. How would you have answered that? What's the pathway to a more sustainable future?
Yeah, looking at the results, I agree that it's really a combination of technology and innovation, policy and regulation. And the question is getting the balance right. Because if you over-regulate, or if you presume if you presume this is the answer, then you may stifle innovation. And if you overtax or overburden the industry, it may not be able to have the money to invest in the types of progress that we're talking about. And I think we've really found a lot of synergy in public-private partnerships, working with the Federal Aviation Administration and NASA, for example, in the Continuous Lower Energy Emissions and Noise Program, or NASA's Advanced Air Vehicles Program, for example. And in both, looking at the FAA Clean Program, really some of that evolutionary work and the work that we're doing with NASA and the revolutionary work for the longer term. And I think it takes those things and then a smart regulatory structure. Like one example, and I'll let go, which is right now, The US is about to implement a carbon dioxide certification standard for aircraft that would apply to new type design aircraft this year and in production aircraft in 2023. That is smart regulation that was formed by the International Civil Aviation Organization and the 193 countries there and their experts. So the US implementing that is very important. So there is a role for regulation to play to complement and support and provide a backstop. Hold us accountable, and we'll make it happen.
Amy, may I add a thought or two on that? Going back to Ed's role earlier before NBAA with GAMA, with other organizations, I have to say it is indeed technology and a policy with regulation. We appreciate so much AOPA, in fact, as well, with GAMA and so many others that are working together with the regulators to create a pathway. When I was giving talks, as I mentioned, 3, 4, 5 years ago, yes, there was a chuckle about how long the extension cord was for the electric aircraft. But most important, I have to say, in a pathway to have a practical solution to solve these problems, the cost problem with general aviation, business aviation, and into the future commercial, was a regulatory pathway to certify these aircraft. Amendment 64 under Part 23 didn't exist until late 2017, early 2018. There was no way to bring an electric aircraft to market. And had it not been for the leaders like Ed and others, Nancy, so many have come together to help create policy and the regulatory backdrop to enable the first innovators, the first pioneers, to bring to market, in this case, electric aviation. So it is a partnership. And there's as much innovation and pioneering with the FAA and EASA over in Europe as a partnership with the technology leaders like Roy and myself and others to bring to market the future of aviation.
I had a different question. Oh, Roy, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Unmute yourself. Roy, unmute.
Yes, sorry. Just on a point, the comment was made that people didn't vote for policy and regulation. I don't think that's true. They voted for both, right? And so I think people understand that it's really both. I will say I truly believe that the role of government is to set aspirational policy. I don't want them mandating what technology we should use. I don't want them taxing one way or another what we should do. But I do think that government can create an environment, no pun intended, in which the industry will actually be encouraged to do things and the consumer will benefit from it. For example, the state of California has set aspirational policies right recently when it comes to electric vehicles. You can buy electric vehicles in the state of California that you can't buy, for example, in my home state in Washington. Why? Because California mandated a certain percentage of every car sold by every manufacturer must be electric. And so I can buy a Fiat 500 all electric in California. I can't in Washington because Washington doesn't have that policy. In Norway, they set an aspirational policy that says by 2040, all domestic flights will be zero emission, whether it's electric, battery, hydrogen, hamsters turning a wheel to create power. They don't care, but they're saying, please make this happen. And as George was saying, the industry is following suit. And so if our government and governments worldwide, as they are doing now more and more in Europe, set aspirational policy that has both tax benefits for those that take that step forward and requirements to, for example, any flight less than 200 miles should be zero carbon or 50% less carbon. By having a combination of those two things, governments can set an aspirational environment in which industry, et cetera, can work to meet that.
Roy, I have somebody put in the Q&A, and I wanted to throw this to you, and George too, because you both have military backgrounds. I'm very interested to know, this is totally off the wall here, so your answers should be brief, but how can we encourage military aviation to push the standards in technology? I think that's a great question.
Yeah, the military standards, of course, are different. Military certification is a different criteria. And of course, there's a different use case and level of risk that's accepted with the military as opposed to civil commercial aviation. And I think military aviation is driven to solve their problem set. And, you know, transportation, air mobility is certainly one of those. So I think there is a movement to understand through DARPA and other agencies the opportunities with electric and eVTOL, but that'll be driven into their own DoD standards as opposed to the civil FAR Part 23, Part 25, Part 33, et cetera. Although we have seen civil certification standards accepted at times by the Defense Department. So I'll leave it at that.
And one sentence on that, we partnered with them on sustainable aviation fuel specifications and worked extremely closely with them. So there is space for that.
Yeah, I'll just add aspirational policy. Department of Defense can say, by X year, we will have our aircraft half emission. Figure it out. And the world will figure it out. And so they just have to decide that they want to do it. And as Nike says, just do it.
On our last webinar, I put up a sign that said Charlie Bolden for president because he was so good. I'm going to say Roy for vice president.
No, thank you.
Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time. I'm so bummed. I feel like we could have gone a lot longer. But I have to thank all our panelists, and I have to thank everyone for watching. This has been an outstanding conversation. Thank you so much. And our next webinar is still being planned. So as soon as we'll send that, we'll get the word out. But to our panelists and everyone who joined watching online, thanks so much. This makes COVID almost okay, having amazing webinars like this. Thank you so much, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.